The fog doesn't part for you, it just folds around your ankles like an old shawl. Soft, damp, slightly suspicious. You're walking slowly because this road isn't built for haste. It meanders the way old stories do, full of pauses, overgrown edges, and no real concern for whether you make it to the end. The village ahead doesn't welcome you with trumpets. It doesn't really welcome you at all, it simply exists. Stoic, gray, and unbothered. Thatched roofs slump under the weight of years. Smoke curls up in lazy spirals from crooked chimneys like the village itself is having a long, slow exhale. It smells of peat fire and something being boiled for the third day in a row. Your boots squish softly through damp earth, and the stone path is worn smooth, polished by centuries of footfall. Some of it probably barefoot. You hear chickens somewhere to your left. Not elegant chickens. These are medieval chickens, scrappy, loud, with a don't mess with me attitude. One of them stares at you like it knows your secrets. There's a girl watching you too from behind a wattle fence. She's maybe 9. Her dress is a coarse sack of wool. Her eyes are wide and curious and also a little bored. She scratches her ankle, then continues to stare. You wave. She does not wave back. That's fair. You pass by a cottage with a sagging door and a goat tied to what might have once been a plum tree. The goat is chewing on something important, possibly part of the plum tree. This village is small, 30 houses if that. Mud brick and timber, thatched roofs that leak, windows covered with oiled parchment instead of glass. But everything about it is solid, heavy, lived in. Like it's always been here and will keep being here long after you're gone. There's a low sound in the distance. A bell, perhaps, or just a cow having a midlife crisis. In either case, it pulls your eyes toward the church. A crooked little building with a stone base and timber spire, leaning slightly to the left as if it too is tired. A woman walks past you carrying a bundle of sticks strapped to her back. Her face is lined like tree bark. Her hands are stronger than your future. She doesn't look at you, but you feel noticed anyway. There's something else in the air. Not just wood smoke and livestock. It's memory. The kind that lingers in ruts in the road, in the grooves of a spoon worn down by generations of the same stirring motion. And beneath it all, quiet, not silent, you hear things. A blackbird, a cough, a door creaking somewhere. But it's all soft, tucked in, like the world is trying not to wake the baby. You come to a stone bench near the edge of the village, half sunk into the ground. It wasn't built here, it grew here, you think. People sat here while waiting, or thinking, or just escaping a kitchen too full of steam and children and chores. You sit down. From here you can see the outline of the village women moving between tasks. No one is idle, but no one is rushing. A slow rhythm hums underneath it all, something older than clocks, something like the beat of a spinning wheel. You close your eyes, and then, very softly, the past begins to speak. There's a documented truth tucked quietly beneath your feet. Most of medieval Europe was women. Not the loudest part, or the part writing laws, but the part grinding grain, birthing children, spinning thread, and holding everything else together while history focused on whoever happened to be swinging a sword that day. That's your fact, by the way. We'll give you one per chapter like vitamins. This one. In medieval villages, women made up more than half the population, and their work was essential to survival, though rarely written down. Here's a lesser-known thing. Some medieval women dyed their veils blue with the same plant used to make early denim. Woad. It stank like cabbage and earthworms, but it made your headscarf fashionable and possibly toxic. Worth it. And finally, a little mystery for you to tuck behind your ear like a flower. Historians still wonder how much of the day-to-day knowledge about farming, healing, even managing money was passed down quietly from woman to woman, never recorded. Not because it wasn't important, just because it was spoken instead of written. And what's spoken disappears. Your feet are still. The bench is warm now. The fog has lifted a little, just enough to see the pattern of footprints in the dirt. Some are yours, some are hers, the woman who came before you. And some, well, they go on ahead. We'll follow them. Slowly, quietly, with soft boots and curious eyes. And the morning light spills like thin soup, watery, a little cold, but enough to see by. You wake to the sound of wooden clogs scuffing dirt, and somewhere nearby, the muted clink of metal against stone. It's early, but not quiet. Nothing in the village sleeps in. You follow the sound, past low huts that seem to exhale steam from their roofs, past a sleeping dog who doesn't lift his head but does twitch one ear in your direction. And then you see them. A loose gathering of women stands at the village well, their shawls pulled tight, breath misting. One leans on a wooden bucket like it's an old friend. Another has a baby balanced on her hip, swaying automatically, though the child is fast asleep. They all look tired in that deep, bone marrow way only morning people truly understand. The well is made of stone, its rim smoothed by generations of elbows, buckets, and probably a few rebellious goats. The rope creaks as one woman slowly lowers the bucket, hand over hand, into the unseen dark below. The pulley groans, the crank squeals. Someone coughs, you watch, no one rushes. That's the secret here. There's never quite enough time, but there's also never enough energy to hurry. Besides, the well is more than water. It's news, gossip, weather reports based on the aches in someone's knees. You can almost hear the sentences forming between them. Her eldest is courting the blacksmith's boy. No. Well, he's got 2 pigs and all his teeth. That's practically nobility. One woman, older than the others, is untangling a knot in the rope with patient fury. Her fingers are cracked, the nails lined with the sort of soil that never entirely leaves your body. She hums under her breath, a tune with no name. Maybe it came from her grandmother. Maybe from nowhere. You step closer. No one looks surprised to see you. You're part of the rhythm now, another figure at the well, another pair of hands to carry the cold weight of morning. Someone hands you a wooden pail. The handle is slick with use, the bottom stained from countless water hauls. You lower it. Slowly. The air from the well's mouth is damp and smells faintly of moss, metal, and memory. You listen for the splash. And when it comes, it echoes up like a greeting from something old and invisible. You crank. The bucket rises. Heavy now. Your arms feel it. The women notice but say nothing. That's how approval works here. Quiet, practical, and invisible unless you're paying attention. Once the buckets are full, the walk back begins. Some balance them on hips padded with cloth. Others use yokes across their shoulders, like medieval gym equipment with fewer mirrors and more sloshing. You carry yours two-handed, and the water still manages to dribble out like it's in on some joke you don't understand. You follow one of the women down a narrow footpath between houses. She's humming too. Different tune, same age. Maybe the music lives in the stones here. At a crossroads of 2 muddy tracks, she stops. There's a little wooden bench. Not for resting, too damp for that. No, it's a drop-off spot. She sets her bucket down, adjusts her shawl, and heads toward a smoke-wreathed doorway where bread will need baking and children will need chasing. You sit beside the bucket for a moment. It's only now that you realize how much the women did before the village even blinked awake. Water, firewood, feeding animals, feeding people, repairing clothes, washing, everything. You look at your hands, already raw from one trip to the well. You begin to suspect your modern hands are decorative. Here's your historical vitamin of the day. In medieval villages, gathering water was a daily and often hourly task. Wells were social hubs where women met, exchanged news, and quietly held the thread of community together. Now the fun, lesser-known bit. Archaeological digs near village wells have found tiny carved tokens, perhaps dropped by accident, or maybe left deliberately as offerings. A small comb, a bead, one oddly expressive little clay face. Historians aren't sure if it was meant to bring luck or just fell out of someone's pocket during a very animated story. And now, our open question. Historians still debate how much of women's social power came from these informal gatherings. Did gossip evolve into community decisions? Was the well a kind of parliament in petticoats? We'll likely never know because no one wrote down what was said, and women were very good at keeping important things unspoken. Back at the well, a new cluster has arrived. Some faces are younger, some older. One woman swats at a boy trying to climb the side of the structure, hissing something that sounds like it could curdle milk. The day is still gray and your muscles already ache, but you feel something settling inside you, like a piece clicking into place. Like the understanding that this quiet routine, this repetition, is what held the world together. Not battles, not kings, buckets, and the women who filled them. You find yourself indoors now. Not because someone invited you, no one really invites in this village. Doors are more like suggestions than boundaries, but because it's cold outside and the room smells like warm wool, beeswax, and the faintest trace of burnt porridge. The space is dim, lit by a stub of candle and whatever sunlight can squeeze through a slit of parchment-covered window. You blink, and the silhouettes take shape. 4 women sit hunched near the hearth, legs curled beneath them, hands moving in the kind of rhythm that requires neither looking nor speaking. Their needles flash in and out of fabric like little silver fish darting through a stream. You sit beside them gently, like a cat trying to be accepted into a new colony. No one acknowledges you, but someone slides a folded length of wool your way. That's basically a love letter. The quiet here isn't cold, it's comfortable. You realize the sounds you do here are telling the story. The whisper of thread being pulled taut, the occasional sigh, the pop of a fire releasing its opinion. One of the women shifts slightly, revealing a long line of evenly spaced stitches, so precise they'd make a ruler weep. She's repairing a hem that looks like it's already been repaired twice, maybe 3 times. The fabric itself is coarse, a kind of scratchy brown wool, but the effort in every stitch is anything but rough. This is not just sewing, this is survival disguised as fine motor skill. There's another woman with a spindle in hand, fingers deftly pulling and twisting tufts of sheep's wool into yarn. She has a look in her eye like she could spin you into thread too if you annoyed her. You're not entirely sure she hasn't done it before. The cloth they're working on isn't fancy. No embroidery here, no golden thread. But every piece has a life behind it. A story. A sleeve adjusted because a child grew too fast. A patch added where someone snagged it on the garden gate. That seam on the tunic? It's crooked because the baby cried halfway through and the stitcher had to finish it one-handed. And yet, somehow, it holds. That's the miracle of it, really. These garments hold together. People hold together because someone sat and stitched through the fatigue and the smoke and the relentless again of it all. Here's your daily truth nugget. In medieval households, nearly all women were responsible for making or mending clothes. Spinning, weaving, dyeing, sewing. Every stage was done by hand, often over months. A single shirt could represent hundreds of hours of work. Now the weird little historical tidbit. In some towns, there were sumptuary laws restricting how fancy women's clothes could be, even for peasants. You could literally be fined for dressing above your station. One woman was hauled into court in 1344 for wearing fur-lined sleeves far too fashionable for her social position. Imagine going to medieval jail for having cute cuffs, and now our gentle curiosity for the night. Historians still puzzle over how many women secretly stitched messages or symbols into their work. Subtle protests, private jokes, or devotional charms. We've found hints. uneven stitches in the shape of crosses or initials sewn into hidden linings. But did they mean something? Or were they just the medieval version of doodling during a boring sermon? Your borrowed piece of fabric is now half hemmed. You don't even remember starting. Your stitches are not beautiful, but they're functional. One woman glances down at your work, then back at her own without saying a word. A tiny nod. You've been evaluated and found not terrible. High praise. You glance around and begin to notice small things. A woven basket with 3 eggs and 1 spoon. A cat curled up in the sleeve of an unfinished tunic. A tiny wooden box filled with buttons so mismatched they look like they were collected from 7 centuries and 3 universes. In the far corner, a young girl is practicing. Her stitches are wild, some wide as a sneeze, some tight enough to pucker the cloth. But she's trying. Every mistake is teaching her something. Probably not the thing she thinks it's teaching her, but something. The oldest woman in the room stands slowly. Her knees crack like dry twigs. She crosses to a chest and lifts the lid. Inside is a neatly folded gown. Unlike everything else in the room, this is fine. Dyed deep blue with trim, so delicate it's probably only worn once a year. Maybe on the feast of Saint Whoever. She lays it out on the table with reverence. It's been carefully repaired, again and again. If fabric had memory, this one could tell you every song it ever heard and every child it held. The repairs aren't hidden, they're visible, proud even, like medals earned in daily battles. You help fold it again. You feel oddly honored. Outside, someone is calling. A name you don't recognize, said twice. The candle flickers. One of the women gets up. You wake to the sound of bells. Not loud, not celebratory, just soft chimes, distant and measured, like someone counting their thoughts out loud. The mist hasn't yet lifted, and the grass clings to your boots like it's trying to keep you from leaving. But you walk anyway, drawn toward the slow rhythm of the bell. The convent appears as if it was grown, not built. Gray stone walls crawl with ivy. The entrance is low and arched, as if to encourage humility or to trip the proud. You push open the wooden door, and it groans like it hasn't been oiled since before your great-grandmother's great-grandmother considered becoming a nun. Inside, the world is quiet. Not silent, just intentionally hushed. As though sound is rationed like sugar or daylight. The floor is stone, cool and worn smooth. Your footsteps echo louder than you mean them to, so you quickly adjust to a kind of exaggerated tiptoe like a child trying to sneak past bedtime. No one yells. No one shushes you. But somehow you know better than to speak above a whisper here. You pass through a cloister garden, a square of greenery at the convent's center, where plants grow with the smug contentment of the deeply religious. Lavender, mint, yarrow, and roses in dusty bloom. Bees hum their low hymns, and a small fountain trickles water that looks too clear to belong to this century. Then you see them. The nuns. Clad in black or brown. Depending on their order, they move like smoke. No sweeping gestures. No wasted movement. Just quiet competence in every step. One is pruning a rosebush with patient focus. Another walks by carrying a stack of parchment tied with twine. A third is deep in a book that looks heavy enough to flatten her if she trips. You join the rhythm. No one stops you. No one asks who you are. That's the beautiful thing about convents. They've seen everything. Runaways, widows, orphans, daughters sent by fathers with too many sons. They know a visitor when they see one. They also know a soul that needs the silence. Inside a small stone scriptorium, you find a row of desks. Narrow, uneven, just big enough for parchment, a quill, and one person's unspoken devotion. At the far end, a woman is writing. Her posture is straight, her hair mostly hidden, and her fingers ink-stained in that way that says, I work with words and I'm proud of it. You sit across from her quietly. She nods once. A welcome. A warning not to ask too many questions. Your fact of the day: medieval convents weren't just places for prayer, they were centers of learning, especially for women. Nuns copied texts, wrote original compositions, and preserved religious and sometimes even scientific knowledge that would have otherwise vanished. And your odd little glimpse truth. In some convents, nuns used special sign language because silence was part of their discipline, but chores still needed to be done. There were signs for bread, for candle, for stop hogging the ink pot. Probably. The nun across from you offers a second quill. You take it, a little nervously. Writing with a quill is not like modern writing. It's more like a duel, but with paper. You try a few strokes and blot immediately. The nun smiles with the corner of her mouth. It's the kind of smile that says, "We've all ruined at least one manuscript." As you practice, she continues her work. You peek, just a little. Latin, maybe. Religious in tone, but there's a personal rhythm beneath the formality. Could be a psalm, could be a poem, could be a letter to a saint who never replies. Whatever it is, it matters. The convent bell rings again. A low call. Prayer time. Everyone rises calmly, and that way only people on very rigid schedules can manage. You follow the slow procession into the chapel. Wooden pews, unadorned walls, a faint smell of wax and old wood. A single stained glass window turns sunlight into colored silence. They sing, not loud, not triumphant, just soft notes rising like warm breath. The harmonies are simple, honest, more lullaby than hymn. You don't know the words, but you hum along and no one minds. After the prayer, there's bread. Not communion, just lunch. The meal is plain: vegetable pottage, a crust of dark bread, and cheese that could probably defend itself in court. You eat it with gratitude. A nun passes you a small bowl of stewed apples and gives a tiny shrug, as if to say, even we break the rules for fruit sometimes. And now, your lingering question. Historians still wonder how much creative work from nuns has been lost or misattributed. Some poems and texts long credited to monks or anonymous men are now suspected to have come from convents. But since most nuns didn't sign their names, we may never know who really wrote them. You walk the garden again before leaving. The air is lighter now. You realize the silence never asked anything of you. It just offered space. Space to think, to feel, to rest. The door creaks as you push it open. The world outside feels louder. You're walking uphill now, which feels unfair. After all, you've already been emotionally and spiritually exercised. But the path insists, winding through muddy switchbacks until the village falls behind, and trees give way to something altogether more structured. The manor appears slowly, like it's deciding whether or not to let you see it. At first, it's just stone walls behind hedges. Then turrets. Then windows. Tall, narrow, and smug. Eventually, the full building unveils itself. Not quite a castle, but trying very hard to dress like one. Less moat, more well-tended rose garden. Less siege, more seasonal feast planning. A servant lets you in with a nod that says, "I do not have time to be surprised today." Inside, it smells of wax, herbs, and something just a little burnt. The floor is made of uneven flagstones and dignity. Tapestries hang on the walls, not just for decoration, but to keep out the cold and eavesdropping spirits. They depict lions, saints, probably someone's distant cousin pretending to be a knight. You're led into a chamber that is equal parts refined and drafty. The fire crackles in a slightly overworked hearth, and before it, standing like she was carved from posture and patience, is the lady of the manor. She is not soft, not unkind, just sharp, as if her bones have opinions. She's dressed in deep blue with a linen veil that catches the light just enough to say, "I don't churn butter anymore. Thank you very much." She acknowledges your presence with a glance that contains approximately 4 generations of inherited expectations. She is not idle. Her fingers move constantly, embroidering, sorting ribbons, directing servants, managing a household from the still center of a spinning world. Because here's the quiet truth. In a noble household, the lady was the COO HR department, and often the public relations team too. Your daily fact drop. Medieval noblewomen were not just ornamental figures in tall hats. They ran estates, supervising staff, managing finances, coordinating food stores, and often overseeing legal matters when their husbands were away, which they usually were. Today, the lord of the manor is off hunting, negotiating, or pretending to be busy somewhere with a falcon. His absence is not an emergency. It's the usual arrangement. You can sense that she runs the place better when he's not around anyway. A steward enters and rattles off issues like a man late for several problems. A missing shipment of salted fish, 2 chickens with aggressive tendencies, and someone trying to dig a second well without permission. The lady listens, nods once, and delivers decisions like arrows. Reweigh the fish. Muzzle the chickens. Fill the well back in. Quietly. She returns to her needlework without missing a stitch. You are handed a tray, bread, cheese, and a goblet of something sweet and slightly suspicious. The bread is crusty, the cheese is judgmental, and the drink is probably safe if you don't ask what's in it. While you chew carefully, the lady tells you about the upcoming feast. There's going to be pheasant, roasted apples, and a musician who plays an instrument with more strings than sense. She speaks calmly, but you catch the undercurrent. If the kitchen burns the pies again, heads will metaphorically roll. Then she shows you the ledger. Yes, a ledger. Bound in leather, the pages bear tidy rows of writing. Lists of grain stored, debts owed, wages paid. Her script is neat and firm. You suspect she could balance the entire region's economy and still remember who took the last candle stub without asking. Here's your quirky nugget. Some noblewomen kept books of household management, filled with instructions for preserving food, mixing medicinal salves, and maintaining decorum among servants. One surviving example includes a recipe for syrup of violets for melancholy, which is adorable until you realize it also includes powdered pearls. Luxury sadness. You step into the solar, a warm, sunlit room where the ladies' daughters are practicing the lute half-heartedly. One finger plucks while scowling. Another just stares out the window, composing poetry about how her corset is ruining her life. You sit among them and realize this is a world of waiting. Waiting for marriage, waiting for alliances, waiting to become something someone else decided. The lady enters, says nothing, and simply begins helping one of them fix a hem. The girl rolls her eyes but hands her the thread. The moment is small but heavy, like all relationships between mothers and daughters who understand duty better than choice. And now, your open question. Historians still debate how much influence noble women wielded behind closed doors. Some were advisors to kings. You wake before dawn this time, or maybe you never really slept. The manor was soft and full of candlelight, but also stuffed with responsibility, and responsibility makes a terrible pillow. Outside, the world is hushed. Even the roosters haven't started their operatic screaming yet. A cart waits for you, cloaked in mist and pulled by a horse who seems personally offended by mornings. You climb in, and soon you're rattling through the countryside, heading toward the kind of place people write songs about but never get to visit. Eventually, the road straightens. Flags flap in the breeze, embroidered, intimidating, and clearly expensive. A castle rises in the distance, all soaring towers, curtain walls, and architectural confidence. You half expect it to bow. You're taken inside without much ceremony. Everyone here seems used to newcomers looking a little stunned. Tapestries are larger, fires burn hotter, and the air smells like roses and bureaucracy. And in the heart of it all, the queen. She is seated in a hall so big it could fit a small village inside. A heavy golden circlet rests on her head. Not so much a crown as a public declaration of neck strength. Her robes shimmer faintly. Her eyes shimmer more. But she is not merely decorative. No, this woman is navigating a labyrinth invisible to the untrained eye. Around her are courtiers, whispering diplomats, scribes, and a man pretending not to be asleep behind a harp. She greets you with a nod. Not warm, not cold, but precise. You are now in her orbit, and orbits obey gravity. A scribe reads out letters. Grain shortages in the north, unrest in the borderlands, a cousin asking for more funding for his absolutely not frivolous crusade. She responds with patience and strategy, and when the scribe mumbles something ridiculous about naming a new festival after her, a single raised eyebrow that could peel wallpaper. Let's slide a fact into this royal tapestry. Some medieval queens wielded enormous political influence. Eleanor of Aquitaine rode into battle in armor. Isabella of France led a rebellion that dethroned her husband. Queens weren't just royal arm candy, they were landholders, regents, and in some cases, military leaders. But power came with conditions, endless etiquette, subtle manipulation, and the constant threat of being blamed for anything from war to the weather. You watch as a nobleman complains, gently, diplomatically, that the Queen's most recent trade decision upset his portside allies. She smiles, apologizes, then makes a quiet suggestion that shifts blame back onto him without ever saying so directly. It's like watching someone sword fight with compliments. You're taken next to the Queen's private chamber. It is quieter here, though not silent. The room buzzes with the careful rustle of ink and silk. A table is laid with letters in every language. You watch her lean over and sign a few, pausing only to add a personal note to one, a message to her sister about a mutual friend's dramatic pregnancy. A lesser-known detail unfolds before you. Queens often maintained intricate networks of correspondence. Through these letters, they influenced politics, arranged marriages, brokered peace, and occasionally gossiped with razor-sharp precision. In one surviving 12th century letter, a queen scolds a noblewoman for poor fashion choices at court. Regal shade. You sit with her now in her writing nook, where a tiny spaniel curls up at her feet like royalty by association. She tells you, quietly, as if sharing something not for the court, that being queen means mastering patience more than politics, that a single glance can shift alliances, and that sometimes power is knowing when not to speak. Then she shows you her book of hours. It's illuminated, gilded, heavy in your hands. Each page glows with devotion, but also pride. Queens were expected to be pious, yes, but they also used books of hours to project refinement and taste. And sometimes they slipped in the little portraits of themselves looking just slightly too flawless to be humble. You walk with her to the chapel. The sun is starting to push through the stained glass, scattering rubies and sapphires across the stone floor. She kneels, and for a moment, she is still. You wonder what it feels like to carry an entire realm in your spine, to be the smile at a coronation and the name blamed in a famine, to be both mother and monarch, wife and strategist, saint and scapegoat. Historians still wonder how much autonomy queens truly had. Some were tightly controlled, kept as glittering mascots. Others ruled outright. But the records are uneven, shaped by the pens of men who often wrote more about jewels than judgment. You leave the chapel with her, and for a moment she removes her crown. Not entirely, just enough to let you glimpse the outline it has left behind. Faint, but there. The mark of someone who wears power every day, even in sleep.
It's late afternoon now, and the air has shifted. The smoke from the hearth smells sharper, mixed with damp earth and something medicinal, like crushed herbs and old secrets. You're following a path that feels different from the rest, narrower, more deliberate. It leads to a small cottage at the edge of the village, tucked under a leaning oak, as if the tree itself is trying to listen. The door is slightly open, as though expecting you. You step inside, ducking low, The space smells like sage, rosemary, and smoke. There are bundles of dried plants hanging from the rafters, their shadows like wild hair in the flickering light of a single candle. On a shelf, glass jars and earthen pots line up like quiet witnesses. One filled with honey, another with something dark and sticky that could either heal you or kill you, depending on dosage. She's there, the midwife. She doesn't look like a legend, but you can tell she's seen more life and death than most lords ever will. Her hands are knotted but steady like the roots of an ancient tree. She's grinding something in a mortar. Herbs, bark, a little pinch of mystery. She glances up once, says nothing, and keeps working. The silence is almost comforting, except for the occasional crunch, crunch, crunch of the pestle. You sit on a low stool, watching. There are tools scattered on the table, a bone-handled knife, a coil of twine, a smooth wooden spoon. Some are sharp, some are oddly shaped, and some are clearly made for purposes you'd rather not guess. Beside them, a small cloth bag embroidered with a symbol. Maybe a charm, maybe just decoration. Hard to tell. The midwife finally speaks. Just one word. Fetch. She nods toward a bucket by the door. You obey, filling it with water from the well. When you return, she's already preparing a small clay cup with something pungent. She hands it to you. Drink, she says. You do. It tastes like dirt and leaves and regret. Your throat warms. Your stomach wonders what you've done. This woman is more than a healer. She's the village's quiet gatekeeper, the one who ushers life into the world and often stays. When life leaves it, everyone knows her. Some fear her. All depend on her. Here's today's historical truth. In medieval Europe, childbirth was almost entirely overseen by women, especially midwives, who held deep knowledge of herbs, birthing techniques, and recovery rituals. Doctors rarely attended births unless the family was wealthy or desperate. And here's your odd little fact. Some midwives carried small charms or relics, tiny bones, bits of amber, or even pieces of iron to ward off evil spirits during birth. Superstition wasn't a side dish here. It was part of the main course. She motions to a wooden stool by the fire. You sit again, and she begins to show you things. A poultice of honey and herbs for wounds. A tea that tastes terrible but cures stomach aches. A strange-looking tool with a curved handle meant for, well, let's just say, emergencies. You nod solemnly, pretending you understand more than 3% of what she's explaining. Suddenly, a knock at the door. It's urgent. A young man, pale as old milk, bursts in. His words tumble out too fast for you to catch. But the midwife understands. She grabs a cloth bag, 2 jars, and a candle stub. Then she gestures for you to follow. You do, because no one ignores that gesture. The house you enter is small and smoky. There's a woman lying on a bed of straw, sweating and breathing in sharp, ragged gasps. You realize instantly what's happening. Birth. Real, raw, unfiltered birth. You've walked into the most ancient battlefield there is. The midwife moves like she's done this 1,000 times. She wipes the woman's brow with a damp cloth, murmuring something low and steady. She checks the fire. She checks the ropes tied to the bed frame. Yes, ropes for gripping during the worst of it. She checks the position of the baby. You decide it's best not to check anything. Time slows. The sounds become everything. The hiss of the fire, the ragged breath of the laboring woman, the occasional soft word from the midwife. And then suddenly a cry. Small, fierce, new. You feel something shift in your chest, like the entire universe just started over. midwife wraps the baby in a thin cloth, checks the mother, and then, without ceremony, hands the child to her. No applause, no speeches, just life. Continuing. And now for our lingering question. Historians still debate how much knowledge midwives passed down that we've lost. Some suggest they understood herbal remedies, and birthing positions far more advanced than we assume. Others argue their work was largely trial and error. The truth is, they were rarely allowed to write down their methods, and much of their expertise vanished with them.
The path grows stranger now. You've left behind the orderly lines of parchment and the scent of ink and beeswax. Now you walk beneath low branches and damp moss through a part of the forest that feels older than language. There's a chill in the air, but not from the wind, more like something brushing past you in time. You're following someone. She moves quickly but not nervously, like someone who has walked this way in daylight and moonlight alike. Her cloak sways behind her, hem muddy, hands tucked inside folds of fabric. You smell dried rosemary and burnt sage in her wake. She's headed somewhere, and despite knowing you're just a silent visitor in this world, you find yourself not wanting to lose her. She stops in a clearing. There's a tiny stone cottage tucked into a hollow, roof sagging with lichen, and a twisted wooden door that squeaks open when she nudges it with her foot. Inside, jars, herbs, dried bundles hanging from the beams, a mortar full of something green and slightly alarming. This, she tells no one in particular, is the domain of a wise woman. The phrase is delicate. Sometimes healer, sometimes heretic, sometimes saint, sometimes witch. It all depends on the weather and the bishop. This woman, like many others of her time, learned by watching, by listening. She knows which roots bring sleep and which ones bring death. She knows how to ease a cough, how to make bread rise, and, most dangerously, how to help a woman not carry a pregnancy she never asked for. That's the sort of thing that gets you labeled with very sharp words. A historical truth. In many medieval communities, especially rural ones, women acted as local healers and midwives. They learned plant medicine passed down through generations, with knowledge rooted not in books but in memory and mud. This kind of power was tolerated, until it wasn't. You glance around her little cottage. A cat watches you from a shelf. It blinks slowly like it's seen much worse than you. The woman hums under her breath while she crushes something between her fingers. You smell mint and something bitter underneath. Then she pauses. The silence thickens. She looks up, head cocked, as if listening to something outside. Or maybe inside. Maybe it's just a habit. Maybe she's been watched too often to ever feel truly alone. It's worth knowing that many women accused of sorcery weren't cackling in the dark or brewing curses. Often they were simply inconvenient, too knowledgeable, too self-possessed, too helpful in ways the church hadn't rubber-stamped. And sometimes they were scapegoats. There's a tale, lesser known, of a woman named Petronilla de Meath in 14th century Ireland. A servant. She was accused of heresy and burned for confessing, under torture, that her mistress summoned demons and flew through the air. It was one of the earliest recorded executions for witchcraft in the British Isles. Petronilla likely didn't fly, nor chant in Latin, nor hex her neighbors. But her silence didn't save her. Nothing did. The woman before you lays her bundle down and lights a small fire. She drops herbs into the flames one by one. You can't name them, but the scent is oddly comforting, like old tea shops and forgotten books. She murmurs something, not an incantation, just a memory maybe, a name, a promise, a hope. There's a moment when you could almost believe something ancient is listening. Historians still debate whether these women truly saw themselves as magical, or whether that label was simply stamped on them by frightened neighbors and nervous priests. Some embraced the role. Others denied it until their last breath. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in the ashes. The woman reaches up to a high shelf and pulls down a tiny jar. Inside is a blue powder that glows faintly when it catches the firelight. Woad, she says softly as if teaching a child. Makes good ink, and it frightens the ones who think blue shouldn't come from women. She smiles then, a quiet, dangerous smile. You look around once more. This place feels out of time, a pocket of resistance made from bark, breath, and stubborn memory. When you leave, the door doesn't creak. The path winds on. You don't look back, not because you don't want to, but because she wouldn't want you to. She'll be fine. She always has been. You smell it before you see it. The scent hits you like a particularly enthusiastic goat. Sour cheese, roasted onions, sweat, something mysteriously sweet but probably alcoholic, and a faint undercurrent of wet dog. Congratulations! You've made it to market day. The road widens here into a jumble of tents, wagons, carts, barrels, and people. So many people. A choir of shouting, haggling, whistling, and clanging surrounds you. The ground beneath your feet squelches, muddy, well-trodden, and absolutely hiding at least 3 different types of animal dung. You take careful steps. At the edge of it all stands a woman with a woven basket over one hip, and a face like she's seen it all and has strong opinions about most of it. She adjusts her headscarf, nudges a chicken out of her path with the toe of her boot, and marches directly into the chaos like a general entering battle. You follow her. She is a peasant woman, but don't let the word peasant fool you into imagining passive simplicity. She is the logistics officer of her household. She knows which stalls overcharge, which vendors are married, and flirt anyway, and exactly when the baker starts giving discounts on day-old loaves. She moves with purpose. First stop, the fishmonger. The man offers something that smells like it died with unresolved feelings. She inspects it, sniffs, raises an eyebrow, rejects it with a frown so sharp it could curdle cream. The man sighs and offers her the better stuff from under the cart. You begin to see the rhythm of the place. It's not just buying and selling, it's performance. A good market haggle involves flattery, exaggeration, and occasional threats to take your custom to the next cart over. Everyone knows the script. Everyone plays their part. Historical fact? Markets were often the one time in the week when peasant women could act with real economic agency. They sold eggs, herbs, ale, cloth, cheese, and even handmade remedies. Their earnings might feed a family or help pay a lord's taxes. In some towns, market women even formed guilds, a bit of organized sass in an otherwise rigid world. A sudden commotion interrupts your thoughts. A donkey has broken free and is enthusiastically expressing its views on freedom. It charges past you, trailing a piece of rope, pursued by a shouting teenager and an extremely distressed baker. The woman next to you barely flinches. "Third week in a row," she mutters. You'd think they'd tie it tighter. She ducks into a small canvas stall where a friend hands her a pot of something thick and red. "Beetroot dye," she explains. "For cloth, not soup. Though if the stew's bad enough, maybe both." She chuckles, pockets a few coins, and moves on. As she walks, she stops often, not always to buy, sometimes just to talk. A cousin asks about her husband's leg. An old friend mutters rumors about the baron's son and a pregnant dairymaid. A merchant from a neighboring village hints at trouble brewing to the east. All of it gets tucked into her mental ledger. You realize that this woman is more than just a shopper. She's an information hub, a walking newspaper, social network, and subtle diplomat rolled into one muddy tunic. A quirky detail? In 14th century Paris, women fishwives were famous for their loud voices and sharp wit. They were so influential and occasionally unruly that laws were proposed to limit their time in the markets. It didn't work. These women knew they were the glue of daily life, and they had no interest in being quiet about it. As the day goes on, the market changes tone. A juggler appears, throwing apples instead of knives. A budget show, clearly. Children dart between legs. Someone is playing a hurdy-gurdy nearby, its droning song both irritating and weirdly hypnotic. The woman you've been following stops for a moment and buys a honey cake, then gives it to a skinny boy with bare feet. She doesn't say anything about it. She just moves on. Historians still wonder how much autonomy medieval peasant women truly had. Their lives were harsh, yes, but they also ran homes, managed money, traveled for trade, and sometimes even filed legal complaints against neighbors or lords. Their names don't always make it into the records, but their fingerprints are all over the day-to-day workings of society. You watch her finish her errands. Her basket is full now. Eggs, greens, a pot of lard, a twist of fabric dyed sky blue. She stops by a barrel of pickled onions, tastes one thoughtfully, and buys 2 scoops. One is clearly a gift for someone. The other is clearly for spite eating. The mud has thickened since morning. She squelches through it like a queen down a red carpet, barely noticing the splash on her hem. She has survived plague years, bad harvests, frost-bitten winters, and worse gossip. She'll survive this market too. As she disappears back down the lane toward home, you stay a moment longer. The donkey, by the way, is still missing. The road stretches now, not just in space, but in time. You feel the distance in your feet, in the quiet creak of old leather shoes, in the ache of worn-out soles and stubborn purpose. Ahead of you walks a lone figure, hood pulled up, cloak heavy with dust. She leans slightly to one side from the weight of her satchel. She carries little: a bread crust, a flask, and a wooden token bearing the symbol of a distant shrine. She is a pilgrim. But unlike the groups of singing, clumsy men or the wealthy riders with servants trailing behind, this woman walks alone. Purposefully. Carefully. As if she's used to walking without being seen, and surviving because of it. In medieval Europe, pilgrimage was one of the few reasons a woman could travel great distances without scandal. But that didn't mean it was safe. Women walked to Santiago, to Rome, to Jerusalem. They walked for healing, for penance, for the soul of a lost child or husband, or sometimes, whisper it, for freedom. This woman's story isn't written in any record, but it lives in her pace. Steady, never hurried, she doesn't beg, but she accepts bread from strangers. She doesn't smile often, but she thanks the old couple who let her sleep in their barn last night. There's a worn patch on her left sleeve, mended several times. Her shoes are mismatched, both clearly not her own. Around her wrist is a ribbon, frayed at the edges, tied in 3 knots. A vow, a loss, a reminder. No one asks her why she walks. Not the merchant who offers her a ride in his cart, she declines politely, nor the priest she passes without pausing. He looks startled by her silence, nor the group of young men who mutter behind her back. She walks on. In one village, a child points and asks if she's a nun. The mother shushes her. Not out of fear, more out of respect or confusion. The woman doesn't correct them. She sleeps beneath hedges and in the shadow of crumbling monasteries. She bathes in cold streams. She walks with blistered feet, limping slightly now, but still she walks. Pilgrimage in the Middle Ages was no comfortable tourist journey. It meant enduring hunger, thieves, illness, and, for women especially, the constant threat of being dismissed or worse. But it also opened paths that were otherwise locked. There's a real record from the 15th century of a woman named Marjorie Kemp. Unlike our quiet traveler, Marjorie was anything but silent. She wept loudly in churches, dictated her visions, and even tried to preach, which scandalized many. Her memoir, often considered the first autobiography in English, shows that spiritual journeys could also be deeply personal rebellions. Our pilgrim today doesn't weep or preach, but she too is rewriting herself, one step at a time. She stops briefly near a shrine built around an old tree, where tattered ribbons hang like prayers. She ties her own, a strip torn from her hem, and presses her hand to the bark. No words, just breathe. Later, she helps an older man who has fallen in a ditch. He grumbles, then thanks her. He offers her wine. She declines. She doesn't drink, not anymore. You wonder what story that sentence holds. By twilight, she reaches the hilltop where pilgrims light candles. The wind howls here. The town below is distant, flickering with yellow lights like fireflies. She sits, pulls a crust of bread from her bag, and eats it slowly. The token she carries, shaped like a scallop shell, was once given to pilgrims reaching Santiago de Compostela. Maybe she's headed there. Maybe she already came from there. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the destination was never the point. Because this journey for her is about unmaking and remaking. She has laid down a name, a life, a past. She has picked up dust, silence, and something like peace. As she curls beneath her cloak, eyes shut, mouth moving in silent prayer, you feel something shift in the world. Not loudly, but enough. She has walked this far, alone. And she is still walking. In a crooked alleyway that splits off from a bustling medieval street like a hidden root from a tree, there's a wooden door with iron hinges and a faint green stain across the threshold. Above it, a sign carved in Latin and symbols shows a pestle, a poppy, and the moon. You step inside. The smell is immediate. Cloves and vinegar, crushed mint, beeswax, and a hint of something more mysterious. Something sharp. The room is cluttered, but in a purposeful way. Bundles of drying herbs hang from the ceiling like sleepy bats. Jars line the shelves, some cloudy, some glowing faintly amber in the filtered sunlight. A cat sleeps in the corner atop a pile of rags, undisturbed by your presence. And in the center of it all stands the apothecary's daughter. She's stirring something in a copper pot, humming under her breath. Her sleeves are rolled to her elbows, revealing ink stains and burn marks. A mortar and pestle sit nearby, flecked with lavender and something darker. Her hair is tied back with twine. Her gaze, when it lifts to you, is sharp and assessing. Close the door. The rosemary doesn't like the draft. You do as you're told. She moves like someone used to being busy and being right. Her father, once a famed apothecary, now sits upstairs, riddled with arthritis and failing eyesight. It's the daughter who knows which root softens pain without dulling the mind, who can mix a fever tincture from memory and candlelight, who whispers Latin names as she crushes petals into powder. In medieval Europe, women in healing roles walked a fine line. Some were midwives or wise women. Some were labeled witches, depending on who fell ill or who got scared. But many were essential, trained in the recipes of herbals, working alongside men or in secret. This woman, young, precise, curious, has a foot in both worlds. She sells remedies in brown paper packets. She refuses to sell love potions. She keeps 2 books, one in plain script for customers and another filled with symbols only she understands. She learned that trick after someone tried to copy her elderflower tonic and sold a rotten version that made a baker's wife hallucinate a weasel in the chimney. I fixed her, she says, but the weasel still visits, apparently. She smirks, just a little. A boy arrives with a cough. She listens carefully, tilts his chin, checks his tongue. Then, without fuss, she prepares a mix of licorice root, wild thyme, and a few drops of apple cider vinegar. She doesn't charge him. Tell your mother to boil this with honey, she says, handing it over in a pouch. And stop eating snow off the ground. He runs off. She sighs. She learned from books, yes, but also from time, from mistakes, from the night she misread a label and brewed a sleep draft that lasted too long. She nearly lost a neighbor. She cried for 3 hours after. Now she double-checks everything. On the wall behind her hangs a dried bouquet tied with black ribbon. Mugwort, foxglove rue, not for sale. Those are for remembering, she says softly. She doesn't explain. You don't ask. You notice her hands, rough, stained, elegant. They touch everything with purpose. When she isn't measuring or mixing, she's reading, Greek, Arabic, Latin. Medicine knows no borders here. Ideas travel faster than armies when lives are at stake. Women like her existed, though often under the radar. In 12th century Salerno, Trotula of Salerno wrote medical texts on women's health. In the Islamic world, women studied in medical schools and treated both male and female patients. And even when barred from official titles, many women quietly became the trusted healers of their communities. The apothecary's daughter is one of them. She writes, she works, and she waits for a world that might one day recognize her not just as a helper, but as a physician. When evening falls, she lights a candle whose wax smells faintly of sage. She records her day in a slim leather journal. 3 successful treatments. 1 unexpected visitor, you. 1 dream last night of flying through a storm. She doesn't believe in omens, but she believes in storms. She puts away the tools, washes her hands with rosewater, and kisses her sleeping cat on the forehead. Then she climbs the creaking stairs to tend to her father, whose pain she cannot cure, only ease. Outside, the street darkens. Inside, the apothecary's daughter prepares for tomorrow and the next day and all the strange, small miracles that healing women make possible in a world full of wounds. Morning dew glistens like spilled glass across a field of tilted stones. You walk slowly now. The path beneath your feet softens into grass, thin and patchy in places, thick and tangled in others. The graveyard is quiet, but not silent. There's always a hum beneath stillness. Birds gossip in the hedgerows. A breeze rustles through the yew trees, shedding a few dark needles as it passes. Time feels different here. Slower, or maybe sideways. You pass the crumbling boundary wall, half stone, half moss, and step into the resting place of hundreds, maybe thousands. The markers are uneven. Some are upright. Some have cracked and tilted like tired knees. Many are blank. Others are etched in Latin or scratched with symbols only the locals might have understood. One is covered entirely in ivy. Another has a name, but no date. A few are just lumps of stone, barely shaped, like the memory of a name. This is where they went. The weavers and wet nurses, the midwives, the miller's daughters, the women who baked the bread, the ones who carried the water, scrubbed the cloaks, stitched the banners, brewed the beer, and whispered lullabies in smoky halls. Most of them were never written down. Medieval chroniclers, often monks, often men, did not tend to keep careful accounts of the peasant girl who saved her village from frostbite with clever insulation, or the brewer's wife who developed a yeast strain everyone swore by. They did not mention the women who sang old songs while spinning, or who knew which plants cured fevers and which might send someone to sleep forever. Even noble women often became footnotes, married at 12, dead at 24, mother of heirs. They lived in castles and convents in constant caution, and yet you suspect they laughed, told stories, made choices in quiet corners no one recorded. You pause by one grave, shorter than the others. A child, perhaps. There's no inscription left, just a piece of iron embedded into the earth beside it. A sewing needle? A clasp? You can't tell, but someone left it there. Someone remembered. A question lingers. Why do we forget? Sometimes it was deliberate. Records lost in fires, wars, the slow erosion of memory. Sometimes women's work was seen as so ordinary that no one thought to write it down. Why record the girl who made 500 loaves during Lent? Or the mother who taught 6 children to survive into adulthood? Or the nun who spent her life copying other people's thoughts, only to scribble one small line of poetry at the bottom of a margin? Historians still debate how much knowledge was lost during religious and political upheavals. You recall hearing, how many manuscripts written by women were destroyed, or simply attributed to men? Some names survive. Hildegard of Bingen, Christine de Pizan, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Queens, visionaries, poets. But for every one of them, there are thousands more whose names dissolve like chalk in rain. You kneel for a moment beside one stone, rubbed so smooth by time and weather it now looks more like a river rock than a grave. A flower grows beside it, pale yellow with frilled edges. You don't know its name. Somehow that feels fitting. There's something comforting here, too. These women shaped the world in small, persistent ways. They raised children, mended wounds, stored stories in song, planted gardens that bloomed again each spring. Their fingerprints remain, in recipes still used, songs still sung, customs that never made it into official records but live in practice. They are forgotten, and not. You continue walking. A few newer stones appear at the edge of the yard, though new is relative. These date from the 1600s, maybe 1700s. Some are for men, some for women. But even now, even here, there are more gaps than names. Some families clearly had the coin for carved stone. Others had only wood markers, long since returned to the earth. And so you walk a little slower, a little softer. This is not a sad place, not exactly. It's simply quiet. It reminds you that lives don't have to be famous to matter, that the sound of a woman's voice, teaching a lullaby or a recipe or a warning, might echo longer than parchment. You find yourself humming, almost without thinking, a tune you heard in the village, light, lilting. You don't know the words, but maybe they don't matter. On your way out, you see one last stone near the gate. Not carved, not placed, just a large, flat rock with a faded circle scratched into the surface. Around it, a border of small stones, a quiet memorial. Someone made sure she'd be remembered, even if no one else knows her name. And now, you do. You're back where you started. Sort of. The path you first took has changed, though the cobblestones are still uneven, and the chimney smoke still curls in slow ribbons toward a sky slipping from violet to velvet. The village, that small woven knot of people and past and peculiar smells, nestles beneath the low hills like it's always been there. Timeless, tired, and waiting for sleep. You feel older, not in a bad way, not like backaches or gray hair, but like bread that's had time to rise. Full. Settled. Softer around the edges. You pass the well, now dark and still. No morning chatter, no buckets clanking. The market stalls are packed up, vegetables bundled into carts or stews. The chickens long since herded into their coops with a flurry of feathers and insults. A cat watches you from a rooftop, tail flicking like it's winding a clock. Somewhere a lute plays. Faint, slightly out of tune. The sound of a teenager with too much time and not enough calluses. The windows glow gold. Inside the homes, women rest, or try to. The alewife wipes her hands on her apron one last time. The midwife rubs balm into her sore fingers. A girl fingers her mother's rosary, not quite sure how it works, but whispering anyway. A noblewoman lies still, her thoughts noisier than the quiet around her. In a cottage near the stream, an old woman hums a song that no one remembers the origin of. Not even her. But it's comforting. She doesn't need the details. Even the convent is quiet. Books are closed, inkwells corked. Nuns lie on hard beds, dreaming of gardens and theology and sweet pastries they may or may not have been allowed to eat. Somewhere in a hidden cupboard, a half-finished poem rests between the pages of Latin prayers. You step past the last cottage and the world opens up again. Fields stretch toward the horizon, dotted with sheep-shaped shadows. The trees that once looked menacing now stand like sentinels, patient and still. The same wind that rustled the convent ivy brushes your cheek, cool and steady. It smells like leaves and wood smoke and something sweet. Baked apples, maybe. Above you, stars begin to appear. Historians still debate how many women wrote under male names. How many works were lost? How many discoveries were quietly repackaged? But the sky doesn't care. The stars don't require attribution. They just shine. And you, having walked through kitchens and chapels, markets and manuscripts, secrets and songs, you carry those forgotten names now. Not all of them, but a few. You know the feel of a worn spindle, the sting of soap and cracked knuckles, the silence of a nun who wanted to shout, the weight of a crown that didn't belong to you but which you had to wear anyway. And you know the laughter, because despite everything, there was laughter. At the well, in the convent kitchens, during childbirth, yes, even then. A joke about cabbage, a sarcastic comment about men, the humor of survival. You slow your steps as the village shrinks behind you, nestled now in memory and moonlight. You won't write a book about what you saw, but you'll remember, and maybe that's enough. The sky deepens to indigo. Smoke from a dozen hearths rises like prayers without addresses, just a curl and a whisper and a little heat against the cold. You lie down in the grass just off the path. It's cool but not unpleasant. The kind of chill that tells you you're alive, that the night is here, that rest is coming. Overhead, the stars keep appearing, one by one, like old stories finding their way back. You close your eyes. Sleep doesn't ask for permission, it just arrives. And tonight, it arrives with the memory of footsteps, soft on stone, and the hum of lullabies sung long ago by women whose names are wind now.